Okay, so I think we can go ahead and get started. My name is Gabriele Magni. I'm the director of the Global Policy Institute in the Bellarmine College of Liberal Arts at Loyola Marymount University. Today, we are very lucky to be able to have a discussion with Federica Mogherini. We'll talk in a bit about Federica Mogherini and all of her accomplishments. Before that, we are very lucky to have BCLA Dean Robin Crabtree, who is going to open the event today.
Thank you, Professor Magni. I noted that someone has asked for the captions to be turned on if you're able to do that. Good morning, everyone. Good evening, Rector Mogherini. I know we're in different time zones, which is the magic of this moment, I think. I want to begin by just maybe stating some things that are obvious, but I think always need to be stated as a way of affirming the value of a liberal education and the learning goals that we have for our students. Global learning is certainly a 21st century imperative if we're to prepare graduates who understand global, local interdependence, and students should have intercultural awareness and skills to thrive as citizens, professionals, and persons. And of course, our graduates need to understand the relationship between places, cultures, and peoples with sensitivity to ideas and practices that are not their own. And here at Loyola Marymount University, global learning is not merely an essential liberal arts learning goal, though it certainly is that, but deeply informed by our Catholic Jesuit mission to educate the whole person and cultivate a passion for a faith that does justice in service to a world that needs our students' gifts, talents, and commitments. Indeed, Jesuit education has been international since the very beginning, not uncontroversially, but nevertheless, and that was more than 450 years ago. We seek to form students to be and to manifest our institutional and faculty commitments as persons for others, persons of conscience and competence in solidarity with others. And today, local and global citizenship are featured prominently in LMU's strategic plan, with the recognition that, especially in a city like Los Angeles, such learning takes place in our own backyard and across the Southland, as well as in locations around the world. In the Bellarmine College of Liberal Arts, we're undertaking a number of internationalization initiatives as we seek to realize our ambitious strategic goals and to integrate these priorities with our academic offerings. This has included significantly increasing the number of courses we offer with global immersion components, especially each spring and summer. And beyond our semester summer abroad programs, which obviously still exist. But recent courses have traveled groups of students with faculty to Cuba, Mexico, Peru, Germany, Greece, England, Ireland, Italy, the Ukraine, Israel, Poland, Ghana, Senegal, China, Japan, India, New Zealand, I think many more. Importantly, we're supporting students from all socioeconomic and educational backgrounds to have these high impact international educational experiences, which can be among the most transformational aspects of the college years. And yet these are too often inequitably experienced by students from low income backgrounds or first gen students, and so on. And fortunately, alumni and other donors have contributed to our internationalization and engagement funds in BCLA to offset the costs of these experiences, to support faculty in developing them, and of course, to support student travel. Today's event is sponsored by the Global Policy Institute in BCLA, and I wanted to say a few words about that. GPI was inaugurated in 2016 as one very exciting facet of our comprehensive approach to internationalization in BCLA. And I want to recognize the vision and work of Professor Michael Genovese here, who's the founder and inaugural director and still president of GPI, as well as Professor Jean Park, who served a term as GPI director, and now Professor Gabriele Magni, who is our current GPI director and has envisioned this program today and many others already this semester and for this academic year. I want to mention too efforts of other colleagues in the Political Science and International Relations Department, including Professors Janie Steckenrider, Jennifer Ramos, and Fariel Sharif, all of whom have served in an advisory capacity and or have been instrumental in developing our international relations program, which is one of our newest majors and already one of our most popular, and expanding the global imagination of the department. Along with Professor Fernando Guerra, the director of the Levy Center for the Study of Los Angeles, who is always imagining the global and the local together. Envisioning programming to advance our understanding of the world, and especially their engagement of distinguished speakers like Rector Mogherini, world leaders, scholars, diplomats, and thought leaders from all sectors of public life and from all mass media who have significantly enhanced the global learning of our students. I just wanted to mention too, as LMU becomes iteratively more intentional about global learning, this week the American Council on Education is visiting LMU as part of our ACE Internationalization Lab across institutional study of opportunities for and to identify and overcome any barriers to what is known as comprehensive internationalization. And Professor Jennifer Ramos of the department is co-chair of the ACE iLab endeavor, which has been unfolding for a couple of years and is culminating this semester. So all of this is to say that here at LMU, we take internationalization and global learning very seriously. And we are well served by having BCLA faculty deeply engaged in all of this internationalization work and often leading the charge, not surprisingly. Lastly, but certainly not least, I want to offer my warmest welcome to today's very distinguished speaker, Federica Mogherini. We welcome you to LMU. Grateful for these virtual technologies that have made your visit with our students today possible. As Dean of the Bellarmine College of Liberal Arts at LMU, I also want to bring greetings on behalf of President Timothy Law Snyder, Provost Thomas Poon, and all of LMU's senior leadership. It's my honor and privilege to greet you on their behalf and to express our gratitude for your being with us today. Thank you so much. And so many people have come to hear you. And so let's get it started.
Okay, thank you so much, Robin. Okay, so I'm very excited to welcome Rector Mogherini. The list of accomplishments is really long. I'll keep it short so that we can spend more time talking about the current issue. But very briefly, Federica Mogherini between 2014 and 2019 was the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, and she was the Vice President of the European Commission. In this role, she was Europe's top diplomat. She was coordinating foreign policy among then 28 countries. And during her tenure, she was really instrumental in forging the Iran nuclear deal. She launched the EU Global Strategy for Foreign and Security Policy. Before that, Federica Mogherini was Italy's Minister for Foreign Affairs, and currently she is Director of the College of Europe, and she is also the co-chair of the United Nations High-Level Panel on Internal Displacement. On a personal note, I'm very excited about being able to host Federica Mogherini today as an Italian citizen. She was my Minister of Foreign Affairs, and I was in grad school studying European politics when she was leading European foreign policy. So thank you so much for being here with us, Rector Mogherini.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure and honor for me to join you. Indeed, the miracle of technology is that having so many hours of time difference, I can say good morning to you and you can say good evening to me and we can still have this conversation. I'm really thrilled about this opportunity we have and looking forward to our exchange this morning.
Okay, great. Just a quick announcement. We're going to spend the first half of the event engaging in a conversation, and then we are going to open it up for questions from the audience. So please feel free to submit questions anytime via the Q&A feature on Zoom, not through the chat, please, but Q&A, because we are not monitoring the chat. Okay, so I want to start with a question about your role as High Representative for Foreign Policy, your role as Vice President of the European Community. Can you tell us a little bit about your job? What were your responsibilities? What were you doing during those 5 years?
This is a very good question to start with, for sure, because indeed it is already very difficult for Europeans, and I can imagine even more so for American citizens or international audience to fully grasp what it means. Also because the title, High Representative Foreign and Security Policy, doesn't necessarily explain it perfectly well. And in practical terms, the role of High Representative means that you coordinate the foreign policy, the security policy, and defense policy of the member states. At my time, still 28. The Brexit referendum happened during my mandate, but became operational only afterwards. So I was always dealing still with 28 countries, which in practical terms means that you chair and you prepare and you chair the Council of Foreign Ministers of the 28 member states, the Council of Defense Ministers, and the Council of Development Cooperation Ministers. Sometimes you can also chair the Council of Trade Ministers, but this is normally something that is left to the rotating presidencies of one of the member states. And to give you an idea, for those of you that have not particular insight on the European functioning of the European institutions, a Foreign Affairs Council, so the council that gathers all the 28 at the time foreign ministers, happens once a month minimum, and sometimes twice a month. So this is a big part of the job. And the council is normally 1 day long while you discuss and take decisions and common positions on current issues of foreign affairs. It can be Libya, it can be Syria, it can be a common position on the sustainable development goals at the time, on climate change, or relations with China, or partnership with Africa or Latin America, the crisis in Venezuela, transatlantic relationship, whatever. And every month you have an agenda of the council and you take decisions by unanimity. So a big part of the job is to create consensus on a common foreign and security policy. And the same with the defense ministers, because the European Union has also a defense and security pillar. And on development cooperation, because the European Union is still the first donor in terms of humanitarian and development aid. Apart from that, on top of that, you have the responsibility that a normal foreign minister and normal defense minister has. So you have bilateral visits to do or to receive. You visit bilaterally a country or an institution. You attend the General Assembly of the United Nations. You attend ministerial meetings. You attend summits. Again, it can be with the African Union. It can be counterterrorism coalition, the anti-ISIL coalition. And you prepare the files, obviously, of the decisions that need to be taken. And at the same time, here again, as somehow the foreign and the defense minister of the European Union, you combine the agenda that a defense and a foreign minister would have. So you also have a military staff, and you have that also to coordinate. You have, European Union has 16 military operations around the world. So part of your job is also to prepare the chain of command, take some decisions on operational side, visit the men and women that serve for the military operations of the Union, mainly in Africa and in the Balkans. And then on top of that, you are also the vice president of the Commission. And in that role, you attend every week the meeting of the commissioners. You are in charge of coordinating all the external action of the Commission, which means basically all the programs that are run by the European Commission, that mainly is development aid, humanitarian aid, partnerships with the neighboring countries, from Ukraine to Egypt to Morocco, or so on and so forth. And in that capacity, but also as a chair of the council, you attend the parliamentary sessions. So the European Parliament plenary sessions every month. You have parliamentary debates. You can have meetings in the Foreign Affairs Committee. As a minister goes to the national parliament, the High Representative goes to the European Parliament. So quite a busy agenda.
Yeah, quite easy. And you mentioned a wide range of issues and responsibilities, and you emphasize the importance of coordination and finding consensus. So the question is, how do you do it among almost 30 countries who may have different goals, different priorities, different perspectives on so many different issues? So how does that happen? How is the discussion?
Technically, this takes a lot of time, but you can count on a very heavy structure that is there exactly to prepare decisions. You have every member state has ambassadors to the European Union, permanent representations to the European Union that are dedicated to preparing decisions and following all the different files together with the staff. So you prepare decisions beforehand. So basically for the Foreign Affairs Council, you have normally 4 weeks between among the different meetings. And so basically you start the preparation of the following one the day after you finish the previous one. So you have 4 weeks to prepare. You put on the table normally of the ambassadors first some drafts for conclusions, texts of decisions. It can be a decision to adopt sanctions, for instance, or it can be a decision stating a policy towards a partner or towards a crisis. It can be a statement, and the ambassadors have several rounds of preparation. And then it comes to the ministers' table in the council itself, where only the points that have been left open, so they were controversial for the ambassadors, are tackled by the ministers. In my case, I think that every high representative has a different way of handling consensus making and building. I had a very probably Italian and Mediterranean way of trying to reach consensus. It was very, I would say, time consuming, but it always worked. I always had unanimity at 28, even with the UK after Brexit referendum happened. I never had a problem. And I had Boris Johnson as a foreign minister, so it was not the easiest exercise, but it was always consensual. In my case, I spent a lot of time individually with ministers, calling, texting. All ministers had my mobile phone and could reach me anytime. And if I knew that there was a particularly sensitive issue for one country, I was reaching out before, asking which the red lines were, how it would accommodate things. And this attention that was paid to their needs and their political needs at the end of the day was helping in reaching consensus. I think it helped a lot in my case, the fact that I was a foreign minister myself before. And so I knew and I understood what was important for them to achieve. And I knew perfectly well that a foreign minister comes to the council and has then to go back home and sell what kind of decision has been taken or not. And so I was always trying to obviously reach consensus on the decision I thought was good to have, but also provide ministers, individual ministers, arguments that they could sell at home. In this respect, often you think that it's easier to reach consensus if you take things out of a text. In my case, again, I think it's a Latin approach. In my case, I was trying to add elements so that everybody could recognize their own line in the text. So maybe they didn't like some parts of it, but they could go back home and say that our point is in. And so that made a little bit easier the consensus making. But then there were some issues that were more difficult. And there, my approach with the ministers was always this: let's not focus on the words, on the wording or the commas. Sometimes you have discussions about, literally the wording. And let's try to focus on the common sense of direction, what we need to do together. And when you move the decision on that level, you normally find consensus a little bit easier.
Okay, and what is one accomplishment that you are especially proud of during your tenure as High Representative and Vice President?
Maybe I'll mention two. One is what you mentioned, the Iran nuclear deal. More than the achievement of the deal, the achievement of the deal was great and it was a great moment. But more than that, I was proud that when President Trump decided to withdraw from the agreement, we managed to keep it alive. That was something I was particularly proud of because it was definitely not easy, not to be given for granted. The United States was putting a lot of pressure on all Europeans to get out as well. on the Iranians as well. And I was proud that the European unity in that moment helped the Iranians, the Russians, the Chinese, and the rest of the international community entirely, because nobody else went out of the agreement to stay in and keep it alive, which is what today allows the new administration to re-engage with Iran. So in that was something I was really proud of, that we managed to keep it alive. And then the other thing I was very proud of was the work we did on defense. Can get a little bit more technical, so if you want, we can then go a bit deeper on that in the Q&A session. But the European treaties were foreseeing already since 10 years some instruments that could have been put in place to develop the defense pillar of the European Union, but they were never put in place. They were never used. During my mandate, because of a conjuncture of different elements, including terrorist attacks on European soil, that exposed the European public opinions to the threats that were felt really at home, we managed to use all the tools that were there and to put in place the foundations of the European defense in parallel and in partnership with NATO very strongly, and actually using the European defense to fill in some capability gaps that were identified even in NATO on the European side. So these are the two things of which probably I'm more proud of, yes.
Well, look, I want to follow up on a point you mentioned, bringing the US and Iran together, and then you mentioned some of the challenges when the Trump administration decided that they were going to pull out. So there is a new administration in DC today, and we know that the Biden's administration has spent quite a bit of time in the past few months trying to rebuild trust and relationship with the European allies. Biden repeatedly several times America is back, and then he embarked on a European grand tour in June. So what's the status of the transatlantic relations today? How do Europeans look at America today from your vantage point?
I think that in general terms, Europeans look with trust, confidence, friendship, partnership, a sense of relief, let's say, to the Biden administration. There's a sense of being back together. The America is back, is reciprocated with we are back together as family, which is really the deep feeling of Europeans, I think, when it comes to the transatlantic partnership, which is the reason why, even if during the Trump administration things were difficult and tense, still they were good. There was never, there were very difficult moments, but there was never a breaking point. There was not a moment where we were not partners anymore. Because the people are connected, and the societies, the universities, the cities, people are there. Today, probably those that are looking a little bit more to the foreign and security policy aspects of the transatlantic relations, I think today realize that we are in a different place compared to where we were with Trump, for sure. But also we are in a different place compared to what we might have expected to have with the Biden administration. And I think the decision on Afghanistan was somehow revealing of the fact that some things are not going to be back as before, as with the Obama administration or even with the Bush administration, even if the Bush-Iraq war was a breaking moment in itself. Because I think we got to a point where it is clear that the American decisions on foreign and security policy are determined by domestic calculations, which is fair, which is understandable, but it was not necessarily the case before, because the United States have always been projected towards investing in partnerships as such, as a way of strengthening their network of, I would say, the safety net, the soft power. And today, I think the domestic situation in the United States, the combination of the economic impact of COVID following the financial crisis of the beginning of the century, together with the fact that there is a sense of uncertainty and anxiety in public opinions, make it so that I think whatever administration you would have in Washington, D.C., you would have an administration that takes decisions on foreign and security policy, first and foremost looking at the domestic agenda. And this is a change of paradigm compared to the past. So I would say, in a nutshell, state of transatlantic relations, good, good, but I would say a mature friendship, where if there are disagreements, they can be addressed, they can be expressed, and they can be handled, and it's not drama. It's okay, but it's not automatically always being on the same side. I wouldn't be surprised if one day in the coming years we would have divergences on choice or policy, and this would not represent a major problem, because there are two things that are definitely there to stay, I think. One is that the channel of communication is open, and people on the two sides of the line understand each other. Blinken knows the European Union very well, and people in Brussels know Washington very well. So the communication is open and functioning. And then there are some key priorities that are clearly fundamentally shared. The United States rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement is, for Europeans, clear sign that we're on the same side of it.
Okay, well, you mentioned a lot of topics I want to discuss further, but just I want to get your opinion, since you mentioned there are some disagreements or friction when it comes to security policy. You mentioned the case of Afghanistan. We can think about the submarine deal with France recalling the ambassador from DC. Do you think that these changes are going to provide an incentive for Europe to move towards strategic autonomy more quickly? Is it a situation where we can trust the US, but it's not blind trust? We need to verify, and probably we need to become more autonomous and rely on our own forces as Europeans, or not?
The discussion about strategic autonomy is now extremely. It's heating up. We started this during my mandate. We adopted in 2016 the global strategy of the European Union, and we mentioned there strategic autonomy as one of the directions that Europe should take. And it is often related to security and defense issues, often related to the capacity and the capability to, for instance, run your own operations, military point of view, or take autonomous decisions when it comes to the industry of defense, which is a controversial topic in the United States, because obviously there's the procurement channels that would suffer in the United States if Europeans invest more in the industry of defense in Europe, which would be legitimate. But I think personally that strategic autonomy actually applies to the capacity to take decisions for yourself by yourself. If you look at the etymology of the term, autonomy literally means the capacity to create your own norms, to define by yourself your norms, your laws, your rules, which is quite obvious in terms of sovereignty. You do not expect others to determine the norms you will follow. And for sure, in Europe, you would not expect your norms to be written in Washington or elsewhere. So it's quite self-evident when you talk about autonomy that Europeans have to exercise it. And by the way, when I mentioned the fact that Europeans kept the Iran nuclear deal alive, for me, that was an exercise of autonomy, because at that moment, the United States were asking Europeans to kill the agreement. And Europeans considered, out of their own considerations and values and interests, that it was not in their interest. And they considered at that moment that it was not in the interest of the United States either, kill the agreement. And so they decided to act differently than what was requested from Washington. That was an exercise of autonomy. Is this going to develop into a situation where systematically Europeans will do different than Washington? I don't think so. But I think that the times of automatic alignment are over. But if you look at history, actually they were never there, because we have in recent history, and even during the Cold War, episodes where Europeans didn't automatically follow the United States decisions in foreign security policy. Well, in Italy, we had the famous but old now decision of Craxi with Sigonella, You can look at that, Google that for those of you that are not Italians, which I expect would be the large majority, at a moment where at the time during the Cold War, a prime minister of Italy, a NATO member, denied the use of a military basis to American Air Force, which was a scandal at the moment. And that was clearly an exercise of strategic autonomy from even a NATO ally, not just the European Union. And in recent history, again, you have the decision of some European countries not to participate to the Iraq War, and that was also a sign of distinction. So if you look realistically at recent history, you never had an automatic alignment of positions. I think that today we are in a situation where we have come to a more mature partnership. The shock of the Trump administration probably accelerated a bit this awareness, but I think that Europeans today know that the United States is the first and most natural partner for them in all cases and all the time and in any circumstance, but that there is a need to talk, exchange ideas, and finally decide on a case-by-case basis what is the best option for Europeans. And I would expect that out of this systematic screening of decisions, probably 90% of decisions will naturally align, but you might have some 10% that might differ. An important thing would be, I think, that this happens in transparency, in communication, so without hiding or avoiding arguments or discussions, and without considering the disalignments on one topic a threat for the partnership and the friendship in its entirety. It's a more mature relationship. When you're friends, when you're real friends, you can have discussions and even arguments and then stay friends.
And to follow up on that, so yeah, I guess part of this autonomy of Europe and the European Union is the ability and the possibility to look also at other partners in addition to the United States. And so I want to focus a little bit on the relation between Europe, the European Union, and China. What's the status there, and what are some areas of cooperation between China and Europe? What are some areas of disagreement? How important is China for the European Union today?
Allow me to go backwards, to go back to a few years ago before I answer the question on today and tomorrow. During the Trump administration, there has been a very dramatic moment for Europeans where we had very difficult discussions with the Chinese authorities on something that also for America was very important, and that was steel overcapacity and overproduction and dumping and WTO rules and observances. And in that moment, Europeans were fighting hard with Beijing. We had very tense moments, conflictual, extremely conflictual. And in that moment, the United States were not backing the European position. On the contrary, they were actually attacking the European Union themselves on the very same topic, weakening the possibility for the European Union to win the fight with Beijing. At the end of the day, the fight was, if not won, at least resolved quite positively. But I think that was a scar that remained on the European memory, that in the fight or in the tentative resolution of a dispute with China on something that was extremely important for not only Europe, but also the West, they were left alone. And the position of the United States was definitely not clear and not supportive of the European position against China. And so I would say that Europeans might be now a bit cautious in embarking on what could become a new Cold War with China, without considering the repercussions of this. Europe perceives China as, well, for Europe, China formally is a strategic partner, but a very difficult and complicated and challenging one. It's a strategic partner with whom the European Union fights a lot. There are three levels, I would say, of interaction between the European Union and China. They are even mentioned in the strategy, the European strategy on China, that the Chinese didn't appreciate much, and that we did towards the end of my mandate. And there we define China as a partner and a strategic partner on certain issues. For instance, you cannot solve climate change without China. On that, you need to talk and you need to find convergences and even work together. As well as with China, you might be able to work hand in hand on the solution of some crisis. For instance, on the Iran nuclear deal, China was not only contributing positively, but even with key contributions on the implementation of the deal. So there are areas for cooperation. Then there is a second area of issues on which in Europe, we define China as a competitor, mainly the economic and trade areas. And then there is a third area of issues where the European Union defines China as a systemic rival, which is quite a heavy definition that didn't leave China indifferent. And these are the fields of mainly human rights, democracy, rule of law, and some of the dynamics in Asia. But even here, for instance, if you go back to what we were discussing before on Afghanistan, Europe sees China as potentially an interesting interlocutor to stabilize the region after NATO left. Or if any time a dialogue or a process on the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula would restart, you would need China to be a constructive partner. So the European approach is probably much more differentiated and articulated than the American one, defining areas in which cooperation with China is not only possible, but also desirable, and others where this is clearly not possible today, and the tensions are clear and explicit. But what is there for sure is, from the European side, I would say the establishment of respectful channels of communication. This is probably also a difference in tone that we have. And this, I would say, is, in a nutshell, the overall attitude that Europeans have. Then you also have some European countries that have massive Chinese investments in their infrastructures. And here there has been the attempt from the European Union level to monitor this infrastructures investments or these investments overall, and to try and avoid that Chinese investments in Europe concern areas of strategic interest and security interests. But there are nuanced situations country to country. There are some countries where the Chinese investments are definitely relevant for their economies.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Just a quick follow-up before a different topic. Does the European Union have any leverage when it comes to promoting change with regard to human rights and democracy in China? I'm thinking about the situation or the persecution of the Uyghur population, the Muslim minority in China, the increasing assertiveness in Hong Kong, perhaps threats to Taiwan. Is there anything the European Union can concretely do to promote change in its dealing with China?
Yes, yes, even if I think if one has to be realistic, I think that's the leverage that we have collectively as an international community on systems that are not democratic systems is limited, because all the instruments that would affect the democratic decision-making are less effective in countries that do not have democratic systems. And this is a problem with China, this is a problem with Russia, that even economic sanctions, for instance, applied to Russia, didn't have the effect of changing the decision-making process, because there is a mismatch between the pressure of the public opinions and the decision-making at the institutional level. On China specifically, well, first of all, let me say, if I can is what we're discussing, is it public or is it just for us?
So we plan to publish the video, but we can edit it out.
Okay, no, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. It's just for me to understand how far
how to phrase.
No, it's fine, it's fine. Public is fine. Was just to be aware. No, there are elements of pressure that can be applied and are applied from the European Union side consistently and systematically. And this concern, for instance, the fact that constantly human rights, even individual cases, are raised. I personally, every time I visited China, I always had meetings with human rights defenders and civil society representatives in a discreet manner, but I always had them. And this is an empowering factor, obviously, because if the institutions see that your interlocutor, which is important for you, including on economic areas, pay attention to the state of human rights internally, they know that there are some limits that are watched, at least, as well as what the European Union does everywhere. We have human rights dialogues dedicated to addressing human rights situations, and activities coordinated with all the member states on, for instance, monitoring judicial processes and things like that. And then there is, in general terms, the work that the European Union does in the international organizations, UN system. The problem I see is the weakness of the international institutions on the implementation of and respect of human rights standards worldwide. That is an element of, what I would say is there's the European Union on human rights in China, but elsewhere, because this is an issue that is not only related to China. By the way, we also have some human rights issues internally, both in Europe and the United States, that we also have to address, because the work is never accomplished and completed on human rights and the respect of all individuals and citizens on our territories. But and I'm happy to see that this is becoming an issue that is publicly debated and even highly so in the United States and also in Europe. But if I look at all the different interlocutors and partners and players in the world, I would say the European Union is one of those that are more consistently working on human rights worldwide. Canada is also one of those, but that is, I would say that we are probably, because the European Union has human rights standards that are, sorry to say so, but this is the reality of facts, even higher than the United States one. If you think of death penalty, if you think of social protection, social and economic rights, it's clear that the European system has higher standards than even the United States, already high standards of human rights. So we tend to have those values-based approaches with all the interlocutors.
Okay, and just a reminder to the audience to submit a question via Q&A if you want to ask a question. I think I'm going to ask one last question and then we can open it up. And I guess I have a lot of questions on my list, but I guess it's going to be on climate change. I think the European Union can really be a leader in international climate diplomacy. And what is the European Union doing to address climate change, both within its own borders and then also as a force to promote positive change outside the European Union?
I guess that the answer to this question would require a separate webinar and a separate couple of hours of conversation. This to say, I said I was proud of how we saved the Iran nuclear deal. Let me say that without the European Union, the Paris Climate Change Agreement, first of all, wouldn't have been reached in the first place and wouldn't have been saved after the United States, with Trump withdrew from that, again, making it possible then for Biden to rejoin it. And now the European Union is definitely the main international global player pushing for this agenda to be implemented. Both internally and externally. You will easily find information about all the internal related measures that the European Union has taken. Let me just say that the current mandate of the European leadership that started 2 years ago and that still has 3 years to go has two main priorities: climate, the green transformation, and digital agenda. These are the two main political priorities overall. So you can imagine how much of internal resources are mobilized for transforming, especially the economic system inside Europe. But also, the European Union is the biggest player when it comes to climate diplomacy, when it comes to financing of climate action, when it comes to political mobilization and activities. We were just hosting in Bruges in the College of Europe last week, the ambassador at large for climate change, for climate diplomacy of the European Union that was preparing for Glasgow. And he was sharing with us the basically the extremely complex and detailed network of contacts that the European Union itself has built over these years to mobilize energies around the world for climate action. I don't know if this is going to be successful, but what I can say for sure is that the European Union has spared no efforts on this agenda and will continue to do so. I'm 100% sure of that. Not only out of principles and values, because we think it's right, but then I'm not representing the European Union anymore. So I say we as a European citizen, but also because we have touched this firsthand very clearly. 10 years ago, it was mainly the Caribbean, so the Pacific Islands, that were telling us climate change is real and it's dangerous and it's going to kill us. This year, in Belgium, here in Belgium, we had tens of people dying out of the floods and the fires in Italy or in France or in Spain. So we see it every day. And we see that this is destroying our neighborhoods, our lives, our communities, and our economy also partially. So we know that this is real, and we know that we have absolutely no time to lose.
Okay, thank you so much. Since we don't have much time left, I want to read some of the questions that we got from the audience. We have a lot of political science and international relations majors in the audience. So one question is, what made you decide to get into the field you are now? And more broadly, I guess, do you have any advice for students who may be interested in joining diplomacy or international organizations?
The field where I am now, it's indeed a different one than the one I was before. I was for many years. I was first in the parliament in Italy, then I was in the institutions. So it was politics, but always foreign policy and defense policy. And now, indeed, I'm in academia, which is a different world. The reason why I'm here is because, first of all, I love the interaction with students. Let me say maybe a couple of words about the College of Europe, because this might, and by the way, this might be very interesting for your students, because we are a postgraduate institute on European studies, 1 year with a master's degree afterwards. We also have a joint master's degree with Fletcher School in Boston on transatlantic program. So feel free to apply for that. It would be great to have you 1 year in Bruges and 1 year in Boston. But otherwise, we also have American students joining to study the European Union. We have a department on international relations and diplomacy that focuses on the external action of the European Union and the role of Europe in the world. We have a department in law, economics, and political science and interinstitutional relations. And the reason why I'm there is that after spending 5 years in the European institutions, I've realized that the best way to contribute to a better Europe is actually to have better Europeans and to have better generations of young Europeans understanding better the way in which the European Union functions, but even more than that, to empower them to have the instruments and the tools to improve it and to change it. Because you can change a system only if you know how it works. And so my little ambition is to try and invest, first of all, transfer a little bit of what I have lived and give back some of the knowledge I've experienced, but also to live this wonderful experience. We have 350 students every year in campus living together in the city of Bruges, which is a beautiful place. And, you know, with 350 students, you manage to really have personal contacts, exchanges, and it's a fascinating dynamic for me to have discussions with students about the future of Europe, international relations, international dynamics, but also other things. So this is the reason why I think that this is a different way of continuing to do what I was doing before.
Okay, and thank you for this answer. And I guess to focus on your previous role as High Representative and Vice President, we have a question that asks, what made you decide to go into politics first and then into foreign affairs and try then to push a career in the European Union?
I started being interested in politics and in foreign policy at the same time. So for me, the interest in politics was never different and apart from the interest in foreign policy. And I always said to all my friends and colleagues, I would never do anything else but foreign and security policy. I would never run for a mayor or interior minister or prime minister. The only focus for me is foreign and security policy. It's what I like, it's my passion, and it's what I've always started. Even when I started, I actually started on what it was at the time foreign policy, because I was in high school, age of 16, 17, fall of the Berlin Wall, the world was changing. It was fascinating for me. I started to read articles. It was a different time. We had no smartphones and no computers. So reading articles and getting informed about the collapse of the Soviet Union, the developments from the Cold War to a different era. And then it was the first Iraq War, the second Iraq War that mobilized me a lot. I was one of those, I entered into a youth organization. We were organizing with many other organizations, famous demonstration 2003 against the war in Iraq at that time, that the New York Times defined the second superpower. It's not the Soviet Union anymore, but it's the global public opinion. And that was really, you feel empowered and you feel that you can do something. So for me, it was this was the beginning, and then this turned into party politics, but always on foreign policy. And then I entered Parliament in the Defense Committee. I was in the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and I was always keeping security, defense, and foreign policy as my focuses. And then the jump to the European Union was directly from the ministry, and it was a very sudden one. Well, you remember that as an Italian citizen, but I was minister since few months, and I wouldn't have I would have liked also to stay as I was. Being the Italian foreign minister was not bad at all. I enjoyed it a lot, and there was a lot of work to do, including on reforming the Italian diplomacy. That was something I would have loved to do, but then the opportunity came, and Europe was always my passion. More than my passion was my natural environment. I always argue that Europe, for member states of the European Union, is not foreign policy. It's a different layer of responsibility and institutions, but foreign policy is not, for Italy, foreign policy is not France or Germany or Spain or Poland. That is European policy, and that's different. So it was for me a natural way of continuing what I was doing, foreign and security policy, at the European level rather than the national one. But it was extremely coherent with what I had done before.
Okay, thank you very much.
Even if my family complained quite a lot when we moved from Rome to Brussels, right?
Yeah, I feel that happens quite often among Italians, I feel.
Yeah.
Another question, what are some policies or some issues that you believe are not receiving the attention that they would deserve? Some international issues that maybe we are not paying enough attention to?
Good question. Good question. Difficult to say. I think in general terms, we're not really good. We're not very good in following up situations. Let's put it this way. In foreign policy, you normally focus on the highlights of the day or of the month. Crisis starts or war starts that you cannot ignore, and so you put a lot of dedication and efforts into that. And then the headline goes away because the level of attention of international public opinion on one crisis doesn't stay long. And then you somehow drop it or let it go a little bit. And I think that this is a very dangerous approach, because this somehow protracts or freeze crisis where they are. If you think of Syria, I think that nobody has any idea of what is the situation in Syria today. And we spent years and years in trying to solve it. And what now is not solved, it's simply forgotten. Libya, the same. But also the other way around. I mean, this is true for crisis. We're not good in keeping the attention until it is solved, and we're not good in following up when the acute moment of the crisis is gone. Take Iraq. The acute moment of the crisis is gone, but the stabilization work is not done. So I think there is little attention, too little attention to post-crisis. We're good in crisis management, but in conflict resolution and in post-conflict reconciliation, we're definitely not good. Or at least we don't focus enough, or we don't dedicate enough energy and attention. And the other thing on which I think we don't dedicate enough attention is, and this is probably human and natural, but I think this is really serious. We don't pay attention to the non-problematic situations. I give you an example. There are countries around the world that are natural partners or friends. They don't create any problem. They are not crisis areas or war zones. They're not troublemakers. They're simply there, but still they would like and deserve some attention in terms of positive investments, positive projects, can be even cultural activities or digital project, whatever, energy. And sometimes Latin America, some countries in Latin America are perfect examples of that. They don't create a problem until the moment when they do, and then they hit the headlines, and then they become an issue. But they don't create any problem, so I can ignore that. And I think that not giving to your friends enough dedication and energy and even resources can then easily turn them into problems one day. Let's put it this way. I have the impression sometimes that we don't, with a country that is a good one, it's enough to dedicate that much to get a lot. On crisis, you can put that much and you don't get anything. And sometimes we forget to give a little bit to those that would make a lot out of it, simply because it's not considered as a top priority in terms of problem solving. Sometimes I think that investing in good situations would be a positive thing to do.
Okay, thank you. We are out of time. Just very quickly, one last question. We talk a lot about crises and challenges, and now you just mentioned we forget about friends and we forget about countries that don't create problems. So to end on a positive note, what is something that you are optimistic about in terms of international cooperation, or in terms of where Europe can be a positive leader in terms of change, something that you are optimistic about the future?
The empowerment of youth is something that makes me very optimistic. Probably is also the reason why I'm director of the College of Europe now. I think that the younger generations today in Europe, but also across the world, and every time I was visiting a country in my institutional capacity, I was always including a meeting with youth leaders, young activists, students, university. I was visiting many universities during my times in the institutions. And I've always seen everywhere in the world, in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, in North America, for sure in Europe, everywhere, I've always seen a dynamic youth, courageous, lucid, aware of the challenges, very brave in also expressing what the previous generations they believe did wrong, ready to be empowered and to get their role in responsibilities in society. And this is something that makes me very hopeful. And I think that the European Union has a role to play there to give the instruments and empower the younger generations across the world to exercise their responsibilities already now. I remember with for me, the maximum level of frustration in my life was when I was in youth activism, in youth civil society organizations, and I heard people telling me, politicians or institutional leaders, telling us, you are the leaders of tomorrow. You are the future. You are the future. That time is over. This generation, the generation of young people today, they have responsibility to exercise today. They are already the leaders of today. It's true, they can take time to lead, find a way through institutions, complete their studies, for sure. But there are things in the society and in the world of today that young people understand better than the ones that have more experience. Experience today is not the only element of knowledge. Digital, climate, these are at least two domains. I think also a cooperative attitude rather than a competitive or confrontational one. These are elements on which the younger generations know more than the older ones. So I think this is a positive element on which for sure the European Union can do a lot to empower the younger generations to get the place that they deserve to have in society and in responsibility.
Okay,
and yes, indeed, this is the reason why I'm there, now that I think of that.
Well, I think this is this positive and actually empowering message. I think it's a very good way to end our conversation today. Thank you so much, Rector Mogherini, for taking the time. It was a pleasure to listen and to learn from you today. And thank you so much for being virtually with us at Loyola Marymount University.
Thank you very much. And I hope to see you either there or in Bruges, and hope to, who knows, maybe have some of you as one of our students in the future. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you again.
Thank you.